Hello, 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 and welcome back. I am so thrilled to be back with brand new episodes, starting with this one, and it is a great episode. You may have heard about zones of regulation, think social, and thinking about you, thinking about me. If those sound familiar to you, it's probably because you are aware of the work of Michelle Garcia Winner, and she is here with us today. Michelle Garcia Winner is the founder of Social Thinking and a globally recognized thought leader, author, speaker, and social cognitive therapist. She is dedicated to helping people of all ages develop social emotional learning, including those with social learning differences. Across her 35-plus year career, she has created numerous evidence-based strategies, treatment frameworks, and a curricula to help interventionists foster social competencies in those they support. Michelle's work also teaches how these competencies impact a person's broader life, including their ability to maintain relationships and their success in school and career. I am so thrilled that she is here today. You don't want to miss this.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
It's so great to have you. It's so interesting. I was on a call earlier today with 4 educators, and your name came up in the conversation about implementing your program in their schools. And I was like, I'm going to talk to her later on today. And they're like, tell her we're super fans.
Oh, that's awesome.
I reached out to you because since the pandemic, my colleagues and I are seeing kids really struggle with some social difficulties. And I reached out to you because I think I mentioned that there are a number of them are kids who missed out on the first half of kindergarten, all of first grade, and some of second grade. And I thought about you immediately as I was hearing the story over and over again about your social thinking methodology. And I wanted to have a discussion with you about social thinking because so much of the focus has been on learning loss, but there's been a lot of social loss as well in terms of those key milestone areas. So thank you for being so generous with your time today.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's an interesting topic in terms of developmentally. People think our kids go to school simply to learn academics, but they actually learn how to learn in a community and to be part of a community and to support each other in that community as their learners. And that's often what's happening in those really early developmental years, is creating that learning tribe.
Absolutely. And I just thought your social thinking methodology can really help address many of the struggles that students are facing and teach skills that aren't typically taught at school, right?
So my focus in creating this body of work was about addressing what it is we assume children come into school knowing, and start to, strip it back and really talk about what is it that we're assuming kids already know. Even, and there's a tendency to think very bright kids know even more, but very bright kids know a lot about something they're very bright in. But there's actually no really great test of social cognition. And so it's completely missed on any area. And it's if you don't learn it intuitively, then how else do you learn it? And it's during these early developmental years where we do a lot of activities to encourage that intuitive kind of group learning focus.
Absolutely. And for those who listening who may not be familiar with social thinking, and how would you describe it? What is social thinking?
What I did was I started to look at all that we assume and unpack it, and by developing specific language to talk about things we take for granted. So we have things called social thinking vocabulary, which are words such as, rather than say, give me eye contact, which actually is just a behavior, we actually use our eyes to think. So we call it think with our eyes, because our eyes help us to figure out who's around us, what's the situation, what are we supposed to do? Like, teachers don't literally tell kids what to do. They expect kids to figure out what to do. Like, other kids are putting their lunch boxes away. Oh, I should be putting my lunchbox away right now. And so think with the eyes, read the group plan, which is all part of this, that we come together in school in groups for different reasons. So we have obviously our learning groups, we have subgroups of learners, then kids have free time. But what do we do in free time? We usually break up into groups. And then every time we're in a group has a plan. So is that group standing around and just connecting? Is that group making a plan to go play? If they're going to play, how do we begin play? What's the middle of play? How does play end? And then as we think about ourselves in a group, we also figure out groups based on one's body, right? The physical presence. And so is your body in the group? Is their body in the group? Is their body out of the group? And a lot of times with kids, as we start to teach some of these concepts, probably the worst way to do it is to teach, think with your eyes, is your body in the group? And to get kids focused on themselves. Is your body in the group? Are you thinking with your eyes? And instead, kids are really empowered by being observers. You tell me who's thinking with their eyes right now. How do you know? What do you think they're thinking about? What is the plan? Whose body's in the group? Whose body's out of the group? Who looks like they don't want to follow this plan? Who is following this plan? And so then we also talk about, if we're going to talk about the body, we have to talk about the brain. Whose brain is in right now? Whose brain is thinking about something entirely different? As we think about education, the process through which we're becoming educated requires a lot of inferences. And so not only is our body in the group, our brain's in the group, we actually listen with our entire body. We can be distracted or enabled to listen based on what our legs are doing and our hands are doing, and just how we're moving, depending on the learner. Each person's unique in how they combine their body, brain, be aware of their hands and feet or what they're listening to or how they're listening. And the other idea of listening is that listening means you're paying attention to something else. And so when you're in a group, who is it you should be listening to? And it's not clear to just say, well, the teacher, because a lot of times the teacher is asking kids to engage in discussions and participate. And so how do you shift your listening? So in that sense, we'll talk about their social expectations or social rules. And we're looking at, what's expected and unexpected at any particular time. You can only talk about expectations, whether we're doing something expected or unexpected, based on what's actually happening at that moment, because it's constantly shifting. And so requires a lot of flexible thinking. And so some of our folks struggle with being flexible. They want to come in and learn the rules of the classroom, and then they want to follow the rules exactly and get everyone else to follow the rules. But actually, we have to be more flexible than stuck in terms of how we think the social world's unfolding in front of us. And so through that sense, we got to make a lot of smart guesses. Like, what do we think I should be doing right now? I know the teacher said it's math time, but right now she's telling me what she did for her weekend. Should I correct the teacher and say this is supposed to be math? Or should I be able to be flexible and make some smart guesses that, she's just getting us together as a group right now? And so two other words that are kind of some core. Over the years, I've created like 30 different ways that we can explore social thinking, but these are the 10 most popular. Another one is size of the problem. Problems don't all come in the same size, although younger children tend to react to problems as if they are all the same size. So we start to study, is it a small size problem, a medium size problem, a big size problem? And it has to do with how much help we need around that. Like if we can solve the problem all by ourselves, it's probably a small size problem. If we need someone else to help us solve the problem, it's maybe a medium sized problem. And if we need an adult to help us, or if someone can't understand, then it's a really big size. And so then we help kids start to understand that, our emotions also can be small and medium and big. And how do we pair, if it's a small size problem, then what's a small reaction we can have to that problem? Because emotions always happen, feelings, we always feel. But how big is our feeling is often tied to what size problem are we dealing with.
Right. And as I'm hearing you speak, I'm thinking about all the great resources that you have put out, the zones of regulation, the thinking about you, thinking about me. And what I'm realizing and hearing you speak again is that there's so many hidden social rules in situations that, you can't just teach rules for social skills, right? You can't just teach rules that when you go into a situation, this is what you should do, because it's so much more complex than that.
Well, I actually created social thinking. So the trajectory of my career has been, I started working with folks with autism, teenagers and adults who had intellectual learning challenges, measured intellectual learning challenges, because there's way more intelligence than we can measure, and very obvious social learning challenges, and they were diagnosed with autism. And working with them, and then realizing how much we take for granted in terms of what everyone's supposed to be able to do to be competent. And so when I was working with folks who had very limited, in some ways we can talk about a different learning style or limited learning compared to their neurotypical peers, we could talk about, well, for some, it's hard for them to think through things. Their brain doesn't give them a lot of power in that. So we're going to teach them behaviors. So let's teach them just what to do. But when I started working with folks who had really solid and proficient language, I realized we needed to do more than teach them what to do. We needed to teach them why we do things. Like, how does this actually work? Let's make people curious about the social world, rather than just feel like there's only one way to do it. You need to show up a certain way or people are going to be frustrated. And so that's really was my motivation for starting social thinking, was to actually move away from the idea that we were teaching you a set of behaviors to getting you to realize that actually you're already starting to try to figure out what's happening around you. Let's keep practicing different ways to understand situations, and why is that person upset, or why is that person satisfied, or what did they just say that made this person think that? And so really started to take what we're taking for granted and unpack it, and just make even the teachers and the parents start to reimagine what they thought teaching social was.
And that's just so valuable, because what you're doing is you're helping kids to navigate a really complex social and emotional world. And you just can't memorize social skills in an environment that's constantly changing.
Well, and if you do, you look really awkward.
Right.
Right? Because if you try to memorize something that's adaptive, because our social, when I ask audiences, and it's an interesting discussion, I really miss being in front of large audiences and look forward to returning to that, because you can really talk to people and let the audience work things out. And so I usually start a talk when I'm beginning, the day by just going, what is this? What is social? And let people kind of give their ideas over the years. And just really getting people to rethink what they think they already know. And the truth is, we actually don't know that much about social. We just do it.
Yes. And social thinking, impacts more. And I think this is what you've been teaching people over the years. It impacts more than just a child or an adolescent's interactions on the playground or in the lunchroom. Impacts academics as well, and problem solving ability.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a surprise to many. And I've worked all over the world, international schools, different communities. And it's the same dilemma everywhere, is our social emotional learning abilities is something we take for granted. And when people struggle or they have a gap because we just went through a pandemic, that all of a sudden the world changed and they were not exposed to having to understand how you share space together. How do we coexist and learn in a way that makes it okay for everyone? Because that's the idea of being in a classroom. You're going to come in here, you're going to be asked to focus on a lesson, but make sure you behave in a manner that everyone can learn. We don't actually tell kids that. We expect kids to do that without any instruction at all. And so I thought, why don't we start talking to kids about it? Hey, our bodies are in a group. What's the plan? How, and then eventually get kids to realize, is your body in the group or is your body out of the group? Or to have kids talk about, his body's out of the group right now. We don't even think he wants to be with us. Oh, okay, we can work on that. But if we're just like, he's not doing it, what are we working with? And so one of the things that's been exciting for us as we've gone to visit schools around the country and the world who are using our work is principals will say, wow, kids are on the playground just talking to each other about, you're not following the plan. We have a plan right now. And they go, it's so exciting. It's not like they're just mad, that they're actually being able to engage in some discussions. The last, the 10 points I wanted to mention was sharing an imagination. And I think it's an interesting concept because most of us, when we think about imagination, we think about 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds in their imaginative play. But if you think about what's happening right at this moment, as you and I have this discussion, the listener is imagining the concepts, the listener's not literally imagining what we're saying. They're imagining the experiences in their life that map onto what we're saying. And so as we speak to each other in conversation or play or classrooms, we have to realize that people are trying to share in what we are talking about, sharing an imagination and extending it. And that's actually how we carry a conversation. And how we know not to get off topic is we're like realizing somebody can't imagine this big shift, that their mind is here. And so I think it's, it's something that I just ended up really talking about because I think it's hard to imagine how is it that we all kind of stay together? And it's because our minds imagine together the concept we're talking about.
Right. It's like that joint attention, right? We're sharing that imaginative experience. And then I can also see how that imagination plays a role academically. We talked about social skills not being just about interpersonal interactions, because that informs when you think about reading comprehension, you're imagining these characters and their interactions with each other.
Right. And one of the things we'll see with some of our folks who have a less flexible brain is when they read, they'll tell you what's literally happening in the book, but they struggle to imagine each other's mind. And you can imagine little kids who were not able to go into a classroom struggled to imagine even learning together in a group as they just saw everybody's picture up on the screen. And so just all these different ways our brain, and I have to say, kids did a remarkable job.
They really did.
I was actually in Hong Kong giving a talk in February of COVID year. And I was just about, I was in Australia. And I was just about to return to the US. And I had a call from someone in Hong Kong who was trying to schedule a talk with me in May. And they go, we just closed all of our schools. And I'm like, what? This is like unimaginable. And then they were like, but it's amazing, the kids and their ability to try to, in their minds, just realize that they're still in a classroom, even though they're sitting in their home. So I think on the other side of all of this language is so much about, isn't it amazing what your brain is already doing? And the best way to engage kids is to use language to engage them to know what they're already doing well, rather than to use this language to talk about what they're not doing. Another great way to engage kids is to get them to use this language to talk about what somebody else is doing well and what somebody else is not doing. Because the value of our internal language is to get us to coach ourselves and to realize what we can do or what is happening around us. And so our whole body of work is to take the implicit information that we don't talk about and make it explicit so we can start to develop more clear awareness about it.
Right. And that's really, it sounds like you're taking people to a point where they understand, social interactions and social information. And then because you talk about input and output, that process. And it's not like you were saying, you talked about focusing initially, the focus in a lot of, professions is to focus on the behaviors, but you're focused on why we do the behavior. So understanding first, right?
And that we care. I mean, a huge way to motivate kids is to get them to realize they care how other people are operating around them. So even though I may work with a child who, for whatever reason, is acting in a manner as if they don't care how they're behaving, when you shift the language around and you get kids to think, you'll take that kid who seems the most insensitive at that moment and get him to describe what he wants from others. And all of a sudden, he'll be telling you exactly what it is that we're all supposed to be doing. And so if we can empower people with understanding how they understand the world, they have better tools for using those tools on themselves.
Right.
But many of us learn by being critical of others before we're critical of ourselves.
That's such an important point. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, and you talk about this, that kids and adults all have different levels of social learning, but we all are pretty vulnerable to how we are perceived by others, right? We all have that same reaction in terms of how we want to be perceived. And I think you once said that the core of social thinking is adapting our behavior so that others interpret us and feel and think about us in the way we want them to think about us. And I think that's just so powerful.
Right. And that is where we land, is exactly there. How can I try to bias how you think and feel about me so you think and feel about me the way I want? Now, that also means, I don't know, I imagine your listeners can relate to the fact that as easy as it is for me to say these things after the years of trying to figure out how to say them, it doesn't mean I can do them well all the time, right? And so we also have to give ourselves some forgiveness, because, I mean, if there was ever a time where we collectively shared an anxiety and struggled to cope, it was these past years through which we've lived. And so trying to understand with compassion, when we just have our breakdowns, and it's not just yelling this language out, get your body in the group, follow the plan, share my imagination. It's also trying to understand that each of us cannot do this full throttle all the time. It takes a lot of cognitive power that even us neurotypical folks do. And when we are tired or having a hard time coping, it is very hard to align with groupthink.
Absolutely. And to regulate our own emotions in those moments when we're interacting with others. And I'm thinking about all the kids who came off of remote learning. And even this year, when most schools were back, there was just such uncertainty about, are you going to be able to be in school this week? Is there going to be an outbreak and we're going to have to be back on Zoom? So a lot of kids went back and forth to being in remote learning and then in the classroom. And we know the value of in-person, communication when you are interacting with others to develop that social thinking and to practice those skills in the real world. But we also know that there's a lot more anxiety when you're interacting with people face to face versus on a screen.
Absolutely. There's a speed component that on a screen, we still have the speed of speaking, but we only speak with such a small part of our body. We're kind of all anchored. But in real space, we have space to wander and turn and, focus in different ways. I think we also have a challenge of what's in our kids' minds. And to be honest, this was something we were talking about pre-pandemic. And now we're not even really talking about it so much right now. But how many of our kids have spent so much of their time between learning moments on video games or gaming, and how that gaming actually starts to take over part of their mind's focus. And so now they've got free time at school. It's one thing to be a learner in a classroom, but now what do you do with your free time? And because every moment during the pandemic, a lot of free time was on gaming. And so now they're just in gaming mind. And how do we then invest the energy to build relationships face to face and have those feel satisfying in a whole different way, which is how we connect. And having worked with a lot of kids and adults who struggle to connect, definitely people feel valued when people make them feel valuable. And so it's also taking that time to to make sense of the free time and kids showing interest in each other and learning how to be interested in each other around things that just don't sound very important, like just talking about stuff. But actually, by talking about stuff, it seems like people are interested in us. And so remembering that too, that it's not just about how do we sit in a class or work in a group or stand together, but how do we actually just show interest? And that's another level of imagination as we share our stories and appreciate that people value us as we value them.
Right. And I think those are really great strategies for parents and educators who are seeing kids, in this quote unquote post-pandemic transition, who are really struggling with socialization and imagination because, like you have just said, and that speaks to a lot of things I'm hearing from parents, is that their kids have spent, 2 years with a great deal of time on screens, and they've forgotten how to interact with other people and pay attention to the other person and their experience and to value them for what they can contribute to conversations.
Well, and it's interesting. I would even say it's not necessarily that they forgot it. They didn't get to experience the natural evolution of us moving from a play-based world, which hopefully is more of our preschool and even our kindergarten, where we're having a little bit more time for social emotional bonding to build ourselves into this learning mode. And so teachers now are working hard to build community when kids have felt like they weren't part of this community.
Well, you provide evidence-based treatment frameworks and strategies to help teach social thinking to different age levels and ability levels. Is it ever too late to start social thinking?
Oh, that's a really good question. I actually started developing this teaching with high school students because I started to work as a speech pathologist in a high school, and a number of my students were angry about how they'd been treated in social skills group. They thought having to just do a behavior to look friendly was stupid. And so I just flipped it all around and we started talking about the thinking and what is their thinking and what do they want from others. And that's how we emerged into all this vocabulary to just pull it apart, stare at the different parts, and find that, it's fascinating when we step away from social and think, how do we do that? It is kind of inherently fascinating for many. So it is something we can talk about. And our work has been, while it wasn't originally designed to go into the mainstream classroom, we had so many kids with things like high functioning autism or ADHD who were in the classroom. So teachers started teaching it. And that's when they found out, wow, this can be really helpful for all of our kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that it's just such an important part of the developmental process that it should be integrated into all curriculums, because I think, again, that's a part of the human experience that's forgotten and not taken into consideration when we are preparing children for adulthood and independence.
Yep. Aren't we preparing children to live more independently from the second year of life? The first year of life. I'm a grandparent now just in this last year, and I'm watching my grandchildren who are 1 year old and 10 and a half months old. And it's all about what can they do for themselves now and how much can they feed themselves. And it's our entire life is about evolving in our ability to understand community, thoughts and feelings of ourselves and others, the needs, and how we can be part of this group. And so it is an area that's largely been neglected in all different fields of study, which is the power of social cognition and learning to unpack it. And it helps with problem solving when you can do that.
Absolutely. Michelle Garcia Winner, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And thank you for your extraordinary contributions to the field.
You are welcome. It's part of my goal to have a lot of free resources available to people. So if you look to our website, socialthinking.com, you'll find free handouts, you'll find free webinars, and just a lot of information to help keep unpacking what we usually don't think about unpacking at all. And that is our social experience, to better understand and problem solve ourselves and others within groups.
Wonderful. And I will definitely put a link to that website in the show notes. thank you so much for being here with me today. And I appreciate everything that you've done in this area.
Thank you so much, Karen. Take care. And take care of the members of the community.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Michelle shared a lot of great information. And make sure you check out the show notes. We have a link to the Social Thinking website and additional resources. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.